Welcome to Word of Hope, Ovarian Cancer Podcast, brought to you in partnership with Word and Libby's Hope. For more links and information on this episode, visit wordofhopepodcast.com.
Welcome to Word of Hope, Ovarian Cancer Podcast, episode number 7. I'm Nate Manahan from Women's Oncology Research and Dialogue, and I am joined again today by our co-host, Paul Cacciatore of Libby's Hope. It's been a pleasure to work through the 10 topics that Paul chose as some of the most important research topics from 2010. And today, the last 2 topics, we're going to be discussing early diagnosis of ovarian cancer, something we're all really hopeful for in the near future, as well as the HE4 test that was approved by the FDA. Paul, could you get us started today?
Okay, thanks, Nate. The next topic we're going to cover deals with diagnosis of early stage ovarian cancer. And as we know, this is the holy grail within the ovarian cancer area. Right now, there is no effective blood test or screening method to detect early stage ovarian cancer. It would be nice if there were, because we know that the cancer is highly treatable, if not curable, in the early stage. There was a study that was published by, it was a study conducted at several sites. It involved about 3,200 women from 7 sites across the country. MD Anderson took the lead in this study. And it was very, very interesting. What they were looking to do was they were looking to see if they could use CA-125 in combination with an algorithm, kind of a math formula that takes into account, family history, age, that type of thing. And they call it ROCA, for risk of ovarian cancer algorithm. And they wanted to find out if that would be better at identifying patients who were surgical candidates to detect early stage ovarian cancer.
Paul, I'm so glad we're going to discuss this today and that you're leading us through this discussion, because every time I talk to ovarian cancer survivors, one of the first things that they really want to know is how close in research are we to an early diagnostic test? Because they want to know that the women in their lives, their daughters, their mothers, their sisters, their friends, that they won't have to go through what they're going through. And so I guess what I'm really asking today is, as we move forward and talk about some of the research going on in this, what criteria are scientists using to evaluate these screening tests?
There's 3 terms you see kicked around, and they're very confusing, I think, to most patients. The first one is sensitivity, second is specificity, and the third is positive predictive value. Well, to kind of make it simple, sensitivity is, can the test determine a patient who truly has the disease? Okay, which I think a lot of us would call true positives. Specificity is a number, a percentage that's looking to see how many false positives did you have? How many people did you say have the disease who really do not?
Right.
Okay, and positive predictive value is generally used to figure out in the screening area the number of surgical operations that need to occur in order to find one ovarian cancer case. Okay? Now, and that's very important, because to most of the doctors, I think, Nate, that you've probably talked to, that I've talked to, this is the driving force behind, early stage screening.
Yep.
In theory, we could operate on every woman.
Paul, I think this is probably where a lot of us get really confused, because it's hard for us to understand that each false positive means that there's a woman who is going through surgery that was unnecessary and thus going through unnecessary risks. And I know this is extremely important to the doctors that we work with, and really all doctors, because they want to know that they're not going to have unnecessary surgeries and unnecessary risks for the patients they're treating. Now, what did MD Anderson do to address these criteria?
So what MD Anderson did is they used this algorithm in tandem with CA-125 and an interview, find out about the person's, age, family history, things like that. And they created 3 categories: a low risk, in which case they came back in 1 more year for a CA-125 test; an intermediate risk, which what they did then was to go ahead and repeat the CA-125 blood test within 3 months; and then people they found who were high risk. And the high-risk women were then referred to have a transvaginal ultrasound and to see a gynecologic oncologist. And so what they found out is, out of these 3,200 women, I think it was about almost 3% of the women were determined to be high risk. And so that translates, I think it was 2.6%, that translates to about 85 women. Out of the 85 women, they determined, the team determined based on the transvaginal ultrasound results, the clinical evaluation, the CA-125, that eight of the patients were surgical candidates. It was worthwhile to operate on those patients to determine whether or not they had ovarian cancer. And what they found out is when they operated on the 8, 5 of those patients were found to have ovarian cancer. 3 patients had invasive ovarian cancer, 2 patients had borderline disease. And out of the ones that had invasive ovarian cancer, they caught it in stage 1C or 2B, which again is a stage when it's not only treatable but potentially curable, which is just a magnificent result. I should also note, though, that there were a couple patients who had borderline ovarian cancer that did get missed in this.
Paul, what was the positive predictive value? And maybe you can explain a little more what that means in layman terms.
The positive predictive value that they produced in the end was about 37%. Translated into layman's terms, that meant that you had to perform no more than 3 operations on 3 different women to detect 1 true ovarian cancer case. Now, that's not perfect, but compared to past studies that have been done in the United States, in Japan, and so far the preliminary data on a UK ongoing trial, that's pretty good.
It seems like there's something missing, Paul. Why aren't we there yet?
Here's the fly in the ointment, or here's the kicker. In the general population, it's very, very difficult to reproduce within a study because you simply don't have enough women. But the good news about that is that this UK study that I had alluded to, that's ongoing has I think there's about 200,000 women that are enrolled in that study, and they expect the reports to come out, the final reports in that study to come out around 2015.
Is the UK study similar to the MD Anderson Roca study?
They're using a similar type of setup, with trying to combine, an algorithm of sorts, transvaginal ultrasound, CA-125, and different levels of screening and different risk assessments. So hopefully when that comes out, we'll be able to see how much, sense this makes. But I thought it was a really good finding for this group of institutions that did this study, with MD Anderson leading them. If this ends up holding true in the general population, it looks like a pretty good result in what everyone would hope for. So, but I think a very important finding, and we'll learn more, I think, as this UK study goes on and reports in the future.
No. And an early diagnostic test is ultimately all of our goals, and that is we would be so much better off if we can diagnose this early, and hopefully that's something that we're continuing to head down that direction.
Yeah, it's the holy grail. I mean, if we could detect, ovarian cancer through a simple test or a blood test, and catch it in early stages, we'd have a fantastic, cure rate and control rate for the disease. But unfortunately, it's really important to emphasize that when women see these studies, and there's a multitude of them, that there is no reliable detection method as of yet for ovarian cancer, regardless of what all these studies are finding. Yeah. So, but hopefully that'll change in the future.
No, and it also needs to be often said that when you see the news come out, the newspapers tend to want to say early detection test has been found or something like that. Just wait, be patient, know that when it really is found, your doctors will tell you. But often the reporters that report on these studies, they don't understand what they're looking at, and they report too quickly and make too large of statements about what's really happening. And
and I think you can see where the tension is on both sides. Yeah. Doctors don't want to perform unnecessary operations, which is very smart, and but the women don't want to get caught in late stage where the disease is less treatable.
Yep.
And as you know, it's a very healthy tension. I mean, women can't understand a lot of times the doctor's positions. The doctors a lot of times have a hard time, with that communication to the general public as to why it's so important to get these detection rates up so high, like sensitivity and specificity at 99%. People say that's over the top. Well, it really isn't when you look at how many surgeries you'd have to perform in order to find the cancer. So,
Paul, we've looked at now 9 different studies and research topics that really are important to those who are fighting and battling ovarian cancer. then most of these were reported in 2010. Let's look at the last one. What's the last study that we're going to look at from 2010 that's important to ovarian cancer survivors and patients?
Nate, the last topic I want to cover is the FDA approval in 2010 of a new assay to determine the progression or the recurrence of ovarian cancer. And I want to be very specific on this. This is not to detect early stage ovarian cancer. This is to monitor recurrence or to see basically how you're doing on a given treatment, progression of the disease forward. The FDA approved the test. It's called Architect HE4. The HE4 has kind of a mouthful of a term, human epididymis protein 4. And just by way of background, HE4, back in 2003, there was a study that found out that out of any one single biomarker you could look at, that HE4 carries the best potential as a way to monitor for ovarian cancer. And so I think this is a pretty big finding. CA125 has been the measure that's been used for, it's been the gold standard for years. Yep. But the gold standard isn't quite so gold. 80% of ovarian cancers do express CA125. Again, this cancer antigen 125 that the blood test looks for. But 20% of all ovarian cancers don't express it. And so there's a large population of women that, based on this particular, gold standard, the CA125, it just isn't going to detect much for them.
Paul, the FDA approved this HE4 test, and this will help with the earlier detection of recurrent ovarian cancer?
So I think the big benefit of this is that maybe this HE4 test, this Architect 4 test, can be combined with the CA125 test to give doctors kind of a two-edged sword in looking for recurrent ovarian cancer or progression of known existing ovarian cancer to get a little bit more reliability, on this. And the test is now readily available through Quest Diagnostics. So the patient can talk to their doctor, the doctor can request it. And there's a couple things to note, though, with respect to the test. Again, I really just want to emphasize this is not an early stage detection test. It's for recurrent ovarian cancer or progression of existing ovarian cancer. The notes to the test also indicate that there's two forms of ovarian cancer that rarely express HE4. Mucinous ovarian cancer, which is a subtype of epithelial ovarian cancer, and germ cell ovarian cancer rarely express it. So the manufacturer of the test, says in the notes they don't recommend it for monitoring those specific patients. But all in all, I think it's hopeful that we have another potential assay that can look for progression of ovarian cancer along with CA125.
Right. And hopefully it will continue to help get better and quicker treatments to the women that need them. And I think that's a great study. I'm glad that's another tool in the arsenal for women who are battling these diseases.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, Paul, for all your hard work. This has been 10 topics that we've been discussing now in the last 7 episodes of the Word of Hope podcast. And so as we move forward, let me encourage the viewers and listeners of this podcast to make sure they go to wordofhopepodcast.com. You can check out all the different information that is there. There's references, there's links, and you can leave comments and questions, and make sure that if you have something you want to talk to us specifically and privately about, there's a place to contact us, and we'll get back to you as soon as possible. Please join us the next time on the wordofhopepodcast.com. We'll be recording many more topics here in the future, and we would love to hear more from you. Thank you, and we'll see you soon.
You've been listening to Word of Hope Ovarian Cancer Podcast, brought to you in partnership with Word and Libby's Hope. For more information on this episode and how to subscribe, visit wordofhopepodcast.com.